Should we speak seating now? Should we say stay sat?
Dobře. Okay. We are ready. Welcome everybody. Hello. My name is Karolina Kvačková. I am the Regional Desk Officer for Latin America working in People in Need. We are the co-organizers of this event. Thank you all for coming. I will be the master of ceremonies. I will lead you through this event. Today we have a packed agenda. We will be talking about religious freedom in Cuba and Nicaragua. And I will start with introductions, especially of Commissioner David Burrows, who will be opening this event. David Burrows was appointed the Prime Minister's Deputy Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief on 20th of January 2022. He is a solicitor specializing in criminal law, and before being elected Member of Parliament for Enfield Southgate in 2005. David was a local councillor on the boroughs on Enfield, which included being a cabinet member for Voluntary and Community Department. As an MP between 2005 and 2017, David championed freedom of religion or belief for all and was a founder member of All-Party Parliamentary Group on International Religion Freedom. And I will leave the floor to him.
Well, thank you very much, Caroline. It's fantastic to be here. I'm not sure whether it's good afternoon or good evening. I'm not sure whether this time is your evening or afternoon, but either way, everyone's very welcome. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to the organisers of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance Ministerial Conference, to People in Need, to the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. So there's a long list, to the International Republican Institute, and most of all, our Cuban and Nicaraguan guests, for everyone, but particularly your invaluable dedication to shedding light on the crucial matter of freedom of religion or belief in these two important nations that resonate deeply with us all. To those present, whether in person or virtually, you're all really welcome, and this is an important, significant step to help us all better understand and address this vital issue. I'd like to thank the Commissioner, Reverend Davey, and Commissioner Turkle at the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and the Honourable Sinella Skregel, MP for, excuse my pronunciation, Member of Parliament from North Macedonia, very, very welcome, and a member of the IPP4 steering group for participating in this event, which together demonstrates this is a priority topic for the international community. As the United Kingdom Prime Minister's Deputy Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief, and on behalf of Fiona Bruce, MP, the ERFBA's chair, I'd like to really welcome this opportunity to be able to make it clear how the plight of religious minorities in Cuba and Nicaragua has been an increasing issue of concern. As we all know, not least here in Prague, the communist dictator's playbook is of course known in Europe and indeed in the Americas. And it's important that concerns are not just the preserve of regional or continental concerns, but are shared globally. In Nicaragua, the stark reality of religious freedom violations manifests through a distressing array of injustices, of forced exile, of denationalization, intimidation, harassment, asset confiscation, arbitrary arrests, detentions, and abductions. These egregious actions paint a very grim picture of the challenges faced in upholding religious freedom. So in terms of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, Fiona Bruce, as chair in October of last year, issued a statement which said it noted and condemned an increasing hostility, discrimination and persecution in Nicaragua, in particular relating to the Catholic Church. It also called for the release of Monsignor Orlando Alvarez, whose birthday was just 2 days ago. His prolonged detention stands as a symbol of unwavering Christian resilience by the Catholic Church and indeed shared by at least evangelical churches amid gross injustices. Bishop Alvarez also symbolises the government's cynical manipulation of political prisoners, a poignant reminder to both Nicaraguans and the global community. Indeed, I understand only last night the regime authorities released a chilling video in an apparent gesture to demonstrate proof of life of the bishop. The regime also released images of the bishop receiving some sort of injection or IV. A potential response maybe to calls from social media campaigns around his birthday to ensure there was that proof of life and getting the medical attention he so needs. But what he ultimately needs, obviously, of course, is to be unconditionally released. And that is a campaign which ERFBA, along with a wide community, have sought to achieve. And we've also been asking ourselves the question in the Alliance of how best to advocate multilaterally. One of the action points that came out of that discussion was to use international religious freedom convenings, such as this Ministerial Conference, and indeed the Earth Summit and other international gatherings, to keep Nicaragua on the agenda via panels or side events, featuring released political prisoner voices, exiled clergy, and members of the diaspora spread across Latin America and Western Europe. And this is why it's wonderful, because there is often there's a lack of Western Hemisphere engagement in this issue, which is why it's so good that we are meeting here today. And then if we turn to Cuba, an authoritarian regime has prevailed for over 6 decades. Religious freedom faces incessant challenges. So it's with utmost admiration that we all share that I wish to acknowledge the Damas de Blanco, Ladies in White, a brave collection of women unified by their faith, boldly advocating for their rights and the liberation of all political prisoners in the island. As I understand, every Sunday, on their way to Mass, they are regularly beaten and arbitrarily detained. I also want to spotlight the unjust incarceration of Pastor Lorenzo Rosales Fajardo, imprisoned for his religious leadership since July 2021, during peaceful protests until this very day. And as we know, the persecution in Cuba doesn't solely target Christians. Loretta Hernandez and his wife, Donaida Perez, leaders of the Free Yoruba Association of Cuba, were also incarcerated during that time in 2021 for their religious practices and leadership. And these are victims of that double discrimination of race and religion, based on identity, especially traditional African-based religions. This public manifestation of attending worship and initiation are currently under surveillance. Just attending worship, just an initiation of ceremonies, and state-controlled media are out there promoting discriminatory and religious-based racism. But history has taught us about the consequences when governments target religious leaders. The tragedies during the Civil War in El Salvador, Guatemala, and other Latin American countries serve as stark reminders where speaking out against injustice costs religious leaders their lives. And we must not forget these painful, tragic lessons. So, as we conclude, we as a part of the global community, all here together and online, must vigilantly safeguard and advance religious freedom everywhere. Our responsibility includes raising awareness, fostering dialogue, and advocating for change. To support those practicing their beliefs without fear or repression, we must persist in our fight against authoritarian regimes. This commitment cultivates altogether societies that honour diversity, uphold human rights, and provide spaces, safe spaces, that everyone should expect around the world for peaceful worship and the manifestation of faiths and beliefs. So thank you very much for your attention, and really the main speakers here and the main events are to come, so I hand back over to our Master Simmons. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing out all the important questions and challenges that we have in front of us. I will jump right into introduction of our first speaker. His name is Yader Valdivia, and he is a lawyer and human rights defender from Nicaragua. Mr. Valdivia is a founding member of the Nicaragua Nunca Más organization, where he leads the documentation and accompaniment service for victims of human rights violations committed by the state of Nicaragua. Mr. Valdivia has worked on strategic litigation issues before the Inter-American System on Human Rights, historical memory, digital rights, and support for civil society organizations in digital security. I will now ask him for his intervention. Thank you.
Buenas noches, igual decía buenos días por allá. Como nicaragüense y defensor de derechos humanos, miembro del colectivo de derechos humanos Nicaragua Nunca Más, me dirijo a ustedes con gran preocupación sobre las violaciones sistemáticas a derechos humanos en Nicaragua, específicamente sobre la libertad de religión, que desde 2018 hemos sido testigos de una creciente represión por parte del régimen de Daniel Ortega contra organizaciones religiosas, líderes religiosos y su feligresía.
Good evening, or maybe good afternoon, I don't know either. Dear guests, as a Nicaraguan and a human rights advocate, member of the Human Rights Collective Nicaragua, Nevermore in English, I address you with great concern regarding systematic violations of fundamental rights in Nicaragua, specifically in terms of religious freedom. Since 2018, we have witnessed a growing repression by the government of Daniel Ortega against organizations, religious leaders, and their parishioners.
Desde el colectivo continuamos monitoreando la situación que afecta y que atentan contra la libertad de religión y conciencia. Como resultado de este monitoreo, hemos identificado las violaciones de derechos humanos divididas en 4 etapas. La primera etapa se debe con la separación de la Iglesia con el gobierno y el inicio de una campaña de estigmatización. Esto inicia la segunda etapa en 2019, cuando se da la etapa más grande, que es la persecución contra religiosos, las agresiones y profanaciones a templos y símbolos religiosos. En 2022 se inicia también una tercera etapa con el cierre de medios de comunicación y espacios de la sociedad religiosa como organizaciones. Y en este año, el 9 de febrero, el Estado de Nicaragua, por medio del uso del Poder Judicial y el Legislativo y el Ejecutivo, iniciaron un proceso arbitrario e inconstitucional donde desterraron a 22 personas nicaragüenses que eran presas políticas enviadas hacia Estados Unidos y les despojaron de su nacionalidad. Entre ellos se encontraban 6 sacerdotes, 2 seminaristas y 3 personas comunicadores de la diócesis de Matagalpa.
The collective continues to monitor the current situation of attacks against the freedom of religion and thought. As a result of our monitoring, we have identified 4 stages of rights violations. The first stage, which was due to the separation of church and the state in 2018 and 2019, took place, and there were campaigns of discredit. From 2019 to 2022, there was a second stage, which was the longest one, accompanied by physical aggressions and defamations against the believers. In 2022, media and space closures took place, and in 2023, the initiation of a 4th repressive stage, where the Catholic Church has been severely punished, occurred. On February 9th of this year, the Nicaraguan government, through an arbitrary and unconstitutional process involving the judiciary, legislature, and executive branches, expelled 222 political prisoners to the United States, stripping them of their nationality, including 6 priests, priests, 2 seminarians, and 3 communicators from the Diocese of Matagalpa.
Después de la expulsión de estas 222 personas excarceladas, continuaron detenidos el padre Manuel Salvador García, Monseñor Leonardo Urbina y Monseñor Rolando Álvarez, que también fue despojado de su nacionalidad. Las detenciones arbitrarias han sido una de las principales acciones represivas contra sacerdotes que continuaron en este año con la detención arbitraria de 14 sacerdotes de diferentes diócesis.
Following the expulsion of the 222 released individuals, Father Manuel Salvador García, Monsignor Leonardo Urbina, and Monsignor Leonardo Alvarez remained detained. Monsignor Rolando Alvarez also was stripped of his nationality. Arbitrary detentions have been a major disproportionate action against religious figures. This year, the police have arbitrarily detained 14 priests from different dioceses.
Estas detenciones han sido realizadas en su gran mayoría en horas de la noche, violentando la garantía del debido proceso y señalados de cometer actos que menoscaban la integridad del país. Algunos sacerdotes fueron llevados a casas de formación de la iglesia que eran controladas por la policía y realizando una especie de arresto domiciliar en esta casa religiosa.
These arrests took place mostly during the night, violating the right to due process, accusing them of acts that undermine the country's integrity. Some priests were taken to a church formation house controlled by the police, effectively placing them under a sort of house arrest in a religious house.
Otra acción violatoria a la Constitución Política de Nicaragua y a los tratados internacionales es la eliminación de la personalidad jurídica a personas nicaragüenses, que ya alcanza una cifra de 317 personas como consecuencia del despojo de la nacionalidad. Entre ellas existen 22 personas vinculadas a la Iglesia Católica, a quienes se les ha borrado desde el registro civil, se les ha eliminado sus cuentas bancarias, se les ha confiscado sus pensiones y sus cotizaciones al Seguro Social, se les ha negado la entrega de documentos como partidas de nacimiento y pasaportes también a sus familiares, y entre otros derechos que derivan esto de la pérdida de la personalidad jurídica.
Another violation of Nicaragua's constitution and international treaties is the annulment of the legal personality of Nicaraguan individuals, totaling 317 people, as a consequence of the loss of their nationality. This includes 22 people linked to the Catholic Church who have been erased from the civil registry, had their movable and immovable properties confiscated, bank accounts frozen and closed, pensions and contributions to Social Security taken away, and documents such as birth certificates and passports denied to their families, among other rights resulting from the loss of their legal personality.
Se sigue practicando en Nicaragua una modalidad de destierro de nicaragüenses. Hasta la fecha existen 700.000 personas en el exilio y según proyecciones podría cerrar el 2023 con un desplazamiento de 800.000 personas nicaragüenses, de las cuales se contabilizan 150 sacerdotes, 76 monjas que han sido desterradas por el impedimento del ingreso a Nicaragua, expulsión inmediata hacia cualquier puesto fronterizo, como en el caso del padre Donaciano Alarcón, que fue puesto descalzo en la frontera con Honduras.
Also, Nicaraguans are being expelled from the country. The number is now reaching 700,000 people, and it is foreseen that 2023 may end with over 800,000 expelled Nicaraguans. Among them, at least 150 priests and 76 nuns have been expelled by preventing them entry into Nicaragua, immediately deporting them to any border crossing, such as the case of Father Donaciano Alarcón, who was placed barefoot on the border with Honduras.
La figura de deportación no aplica para nicaragüenses, pero esta se repitió en octubre cuando el régimen de Daniel Ortega expulsó a 12 sacerdotes que se encontraban privados de libertad. Fueron enviados al Vaticano y no quiero dejar de mencionar las prácticas de tortura y tratos crueles, inhumanos y degradantes que se practican en las cárceles de Nicaragua, de las cuales no dejaron de practicarlas contra religiosos. Una de ellas es los constantes interrogatorios y la desnudez forzada, que para un religioso es parte, su cuerpo es parte del Espíritu Santo y es doblemente humillante cuando esto afecta también su formación y su práctica religiosa.
Deportation doesn't apply to Nicaraguans, but it was repeated in October when the Daniel Ortega's regime expelled 12 priests who were in custody, sending them to the Vatican. I must not overlook the practices of torture and cruel or humiliating treatment in these prisons, which have not spared religious individuals. One such practice is constant interrogations and forced nudity, which for a religious person, as the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, is twice as humiliating and affects their religious education and practice.
Hasta donde he mencionado, estos actos han sido dirigidos contra líderes religiosos, pero no quiero dejar de mencionar la situación actual que vive la Iglesia Católica como institución. Hasta la fecha se han cancelado 432 organizaciones religiosas, entre ellas enseñanzas de fe, organizaciones de enseñanzas de fe, universidades, de la cual la Universidad Centroamericana UCA, la compañía de jesuitas. También se han cerrado organizaciones humanitarias como asilos de ancianos, comedores y servicios médicos.
While I have highlighted acts directed against religious leaders, I cannot ignore the current situation facing the Catholic Church as an institution. To this date, 432 religious organizations, including faith education organizations, schools, universities such as the Central American University, the UCA, run by the Jesuits, and humanitarian organizations like elderly homes, soup kitchens, and medical services have been cancelled.
En esta cuarta etapa, el régimen apunta a un ahogamiento financiero que ha congelado las cuentas de todas las diócesis del país y también amenaza con persecución fiscal de las cuentas, a pesar de que las diócesis se encuentran con sus cuentas cerradas. En el 2023, el gobierno se ha apropiado de las festividades religiosas en Nicaragua, de las cuales ha prohibido su celebración en las calles, limitándolas que se realicen dentro de los centros, dentro de los templos. También como pasó en Semana Santa y ahora lo han prohibido en diciembre. Por otro lado, también existen actividades que el gobierno ha venido realizando, que se ha apropiado de ellas a través de las alcaldías y que las han convertido en actos políticos y actos públicos.
During this fourth stage, the regime is aiming at financial suffocation by freezing the accounts of all dioceses in the country, threatening them with fiscal persecution despite their closed accounts. In 2023, the government seized all religious festivities in Nicaragua, prohibiting their celebration in the streets and restricting them to take place only within the temples, including events during Easter and now also in December. On the other hand, some activities continue, but they are not directly managed by the church. Municipalities have taken the lead in organizing these festivities, turning them into political acts.
Hasta el día de hoy, Monseñor Rolando Álvarez continúa privado de su libertad y sin poder oficializar misa desde agosto de 2022, cuando se le impidió salir hacia la Catedral de Matagalpa, y hoy permanece aislado en una celda de máxima seguridad y despojado de su nacionalidad. Y ya lo mencionaba usted y voy a repetir y voy a simplificar las imágenes que veíamos anoche, que son imágenes estigmatizantes y que nos preocupa la verdadera situación de Monseñor Rolando Álvarez, que ayer pudimos observar su grave deterioro en la salud y también su desgaste emocional.
As of today, Monsignor Rolando Alvarez remains imprisoned and deprived of the ability to officiate Mass since August 2022, when he was prevented from going to the Matagalpa Cathedral. He is now isolated in a maximum security cell and stripped of his nationality. Now I'd like to also mention, as you've mentioned, the worrying images that we saw yesterday, that we are very distressed for his physical and emotional health.
Y quiero cerrar mi intervención con una frase a propósito de Monseñor Rolando Álvarez, que cita: si denuncio y condeno la injusticia, es porque es mi obligación como pastor de un pueblo oprimido y humillado. Y aquí quisiera hacerles la invitación de esta obligación que se sentía Monseñor Rolando Álvarez, a cuál es nuestra obligación en estos momentos. Muchas gracias.
And now I'd like to conclude quoting Monsignor Rolando Alvarez. If I denounce and condemn injustice, it is because it is my duty as a pastor of an oppressed and humiliated nation. And here I invite you to reflect upon what is our obligation in these moments. Thank you.
Thank you, Yader. Now we will move to the testimony from Cuba, but I will jump in with a little mention of our report of people in need, which we did on religious freedom on the island. I will start with introduction of our database, ION Cuba, which is the Observatory of Human Rights Violations. We are it's operating since 2017. And it's collecting violations of different kinds throughout the years. This year, we have a group of 15 activists who are reporting from different parts of the island about different kinds of violations of human rights, including of religious freedom. This year, we have reported 280 cases of violations. But we are facing many challenges, one of them being forced migration and exile of activists and leaders of civil society out of the island. Nonetheless, we are continuing our efforts, and we are publishing 3 reports every year, 2 thematic, 1 general about violations of human rights. This year, we are facing the issue that Cuba is now trying to work within the international system. As we know, it's been elected to the Human Rights Council this year. Also, it went through the Universal Periodic Review under the UN, and is trying to interconnect with other countries on the international level, which is, and with this, they are trying to accomplish a certain level of agreement with what they are doing, and that the human rights are not violated in the island. With our report, we are trying to counter that argument and present that the violations are happening, even though the denunciations are not always so visible and so vocal. In our results from the database, we know that 5.7% of all the cases that we have are on freedom of religion, is the violations of religious freedoms. Nonetheless, we also know that 95% of people and victims of the violations are concerning themselves as activists. So we are getting to the point that religious freedom is often overshadowed by other violations of human rights, and therefore is not being talked about as much as we probably should be talking about it. That is one of the first points that we make in the report. And the second one that I want to highlight here before I leave the space to Ricardo is that apart from the general overview of the violations, where mostly men are targeted, men human rights defenders are targeted, with the religious freedoms, it's opposite. I want to conclude that However, we see that religious freedoms being as institutionalized elsewhere in democratic countries as separate from the state, the issue in Cuba and the centralism of the regime is that the the religion is trying to be centralized by the government, by the institutions, namely the Office for Religious Affairs, where they're trying to control the activities within any religion, and are trying to harass those who are practicing any religion. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to Ricardo. First, I will introduce him. Ricardo Fernandez Izaguirre is a Cuban human rights defender and independent journalist who focuses on violations of freedom of religion and belief in Cuba. Human rights work and independent journalism are both considered by the Cuban authorities to be counter-revolutionary activities and ground for imprisonment. Over the past few years, Mr. Fernandez was summoned repeatedly for interrogation by Cuban state security, the intelligence agency that works out of the Ministry of Interior and monitors all independent civil society in Cuba. He was arbitrarily detained for multiple days on 2 occasions, and in July 2019 he was detained and held without charge for 10 days, the first 4 of which he was completely incommunicado. He was detained once again for over 24 hours in November 2019, and he faced regular harassment and intimidation at the hands of the Cuban authorities since then. Late in 2022, Mr. Fernandez Izaguirre went into exile in Germany with his family after suffering constant threats from the island's political police. And with that, I will give him floor to bring his testimony.
Bueno, quiero hablarles específicamente en esta noche sobre el funcionamiento, por qué es solamente un 5% de visibilidad de los casos de violación de la libertad de religión y creencias en Cuba. ¿Por qué hay tan pocos casos visibles? ¿Por qué razón el gobierno cubano puede presentar al mundo una cara de tolerancia cuando lo que sucede en realidad es todo lo contrario?
Good afternoon. Tonight, I'd especially like to mention how this functions in Cuba, why there's only 5% of visible cases of violations against the freedom of religion or belief in Cuba, and why the state of Cuba can present a tolerant face to the international community.
Específicamente, el gobierno cubano y la policía política usan como chantaje los principios de las comunidades religiosas en Cuba. Me explico. Estas comunidades los líderes de esta comunidad y los miembros de esta comunidad se deben a la comunidad, al beneficio de la comunidad. Y cuando sufren persecución, estos líderes y estos miembros de la comunidad, ellos prefieren no denunciar para poder seguir beneficiando la comunidad.
It is especially because the Cuban government and the political police use the principles of the religious communities as a form of blackmail. I'd like to explain that because the leaders and the members of the religious communities work in order to benefit the religious communities. So when they are persecuted, they prefer not to report these persecutions because they don't want to work against the benefits of the religious communities.
En el caso de los pastores y de las iglesias que han sido expropiadas, si los pastores se manifiestan en contra o llegan a los mecanismos internacionales de defensa de derechos humanos, entonces la persecución policíaca los aísla y hace que estos pastores no puedan seguir haciendo obras de fe y de caridad a la comunidad. Entonces, ellos escogen entre denunciar o seguir haciendo su llamado, su obra, de beneficiar a la comunidad. Pero hay una forma de hacer que estas denuncias lleguen a hacerse públicas sin necesidad de exponer a las víctimas a una revictimización por parte del gobierno.
The priests and the churches that were confiscated their properties or they were persecuted, if they get as far as some kind of international system for the protection of human rights, they are persecuted again and they cannot work, they cannot do their charitable work, they cannot work for the benefit of their communities. So they have to choose between reporting the violations of the freedom of the freedom of religion, or they want to choose to continue working for the benefit of their communities. But there is a way of reporting these violations without these people or churches being re-victimized.
Desde hace 15 años hemos estado trabajando en los casos de violación, en el acompañamiento de las víctimas de violación de la libertad de religión y creencia, mi grupo y yo. En el 2018 encontramos a la organización Solidaridad Cristiana Mundial, CSW, que nos dio el marco para lograr hacer público este tipo de violaciones. Aunque nuestro equipo de trabajo fue expulsado del país en su totalidad, logramos dejar a las personas que específicamente trabajaban con nosotros y que colaboraban con nosotros en la isla funcionando porque no los expusimos a el público y seguimos trabajando y documentando los casos de violación.
I and my team have been working for 15 years for the victims of violations of freedom of religion or belief. And we were accompanying them in what they were going through. In 2018, we got the help from the charity organization, Organización Solidaria Mundial.
CSW.
From the organization
Worldwide.
CSW, who gave us a framework so that we could work with those violations and that we could make them public. And even though me and my team were completely expulsed from the country, on the island there are still people that can continue in the work we used to do because we've never exposed publicly all those cases of violations.
La forma de trabajo con las víctimas de violación de la libertad de religión y creencia es directamente documentar sus casos y a la hora de hacer público sin nombres, de forma anónima, entregar en comisiones, en lugares que no hagan públicos esos nombres, pero que sí guarden todos estos informes. En eso nos han apoyado algunas organizaciones, pero creo que sería bueno que se estudiara, que se viera la forma de mantener el anonimato de las víctimas, porque ya les decía, Si esas víctimas, si salen sus nombres en cualquier lugar público al que el gobierno cubano tenga acceso, entonces esas víctimas son más violentadas, reciben mayores violaciones.
So what is important is to directly document the cases of violations and publish those violations, but in an anonymous format, which means that we need to send all the files, all the data documenting these violations to places where they will save and keep those files, but they will never publish the names of the victims. And I think this would be very beneficial to see and continue this way of keeping all these cases documented, but anonymous. Because the moment that someone's name the moment a name of a victim is published in a place where the Cuban government can reach this name or find this name, they are even more persecuted.
Muchas gracias por su apoyo.
Oh, thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the intervention. Indeed, very strong. So now we will watch a short video, and afterwards we will have a Q&A opened before we will take it to presentation of the initiative that we have prepared. Thank you.
Veintiuna fueron detenidas antes de misa y una fue detenida después de misa, que fue el caso de Yudaisis Pérez González.
En los últimos 5 años, la dictadura ha reformado y aprobado leyes y normativas y algunos artículos de la Constitución política para legitimar sus violaciones a los derechos humanos.
La Iglesia Católica realizó un papel importante en el contexto de las protestas de Nicaragua iniciadas en abril de 2018. En una primera etapa resguardó a manifestantes en las parroquias. Algunos templos se usaron como puestos médicos y centros de acopio de víveres y medicina para los heridos, y luego acompañó a organizaciones de la sociedad civil y organismos de derechos humanos, nacionales e internacionales, en las demandas de justicia. Pero en respuesta, el gobierno de Daniel Ortega arremetió contra la alta jerarquía eclesiástica, acusando a obispos y sacerdotes de haberse prestado a un golpe de Estado. El 12 de marzo de 2022, el Vaticano, mediante un escueto comunicado, informó que el gobierno de Nicaragua expulsó al nuncio apostólico Monseñor Waldemar Stanislao Somertag, conminándolo a que dejara inmediatamente el país. A partir de ese momento, inició una nueva etapa de ataque a la Iglesia, que incluyó la criminalización de sacerdotes. En junio de 2022, detienen y acusan al sacerdote Manuel Salvador García de la Iglesia Jesús de Nazareno, en Nandaime, por el supuesto delito de amenaza con armas, en perjuicio de 5 personas. Es el primer religioso condenado a prisión. Otras detenciones le siguieron. El 19 de agosto, la policía detuvo a Monseñor Rolando Álvarez, obispo de la diócesis de Matagalpa, luego que cuestionara el cierre arbitrario de más de 10 emisoras católicas en el país. Hasta hoy, se desconoce la condición de salud del religioso. La libertad religiosa es así, otro hecho criminalizado por el gobierno de Daniel Ortega.
Hello, everyone. My name is
Thank you. So now I will invite to the floor Fernanda, Fernanda San Martín Carrasco and her colleague Sanela Skrigel, both from the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. Fernanda, as a director, is a former Bolivian member of parliament and former chair of the Committee on Gender Rights and the Chamber of Deputies. She was a member of the steering committee of the International Panel for Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and later project manager for Latin America. Her colleague, Sanela, is a member of Parliament of North Macedonia, active in the committees on education, labor, social policy, European affairs, and foreign affairs. Feminist, human rights advocate, and researcher with special focus on social inclusion of vulnerable groups on the local and national level. I will give them floor now to introduce us to their initiative and to answer any of the questions that you might have for them or for our colleagues from Cuba and Nicaragua.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organizer for this opportunity to be here and discuss on this very important matter and human rights issue. I would like to greet all the present here. I would like first and foremost thank you for the work that you are doing in both of your country. Thank you for your testimonies and thank you for being so brave to speak out for this important human rights issue. I would like also to greet Forbes experts, Knox Thames and Emily Cole from the Pepperdine University program on global faith and inclusive society. So as it was mentioned, my name is Sanela Shkriel. I'm member of parliament in North Macedonia. Previous to this role, I have spent my whole life in civil society working on human rights and fighting for the right for every individual and every person to live its life according to its own beliefs. So I really believe that human rights are not something that we could separate and say that we are supporting one and not supporting another. It's either you are for human rights or you are not. And freedom of religion and belief, of course, is a very fundamental part of that. As it was mentioned, I'm part of the steering group for the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, often called IPPF-4. We are a global network of parliamentarians from all sorts of political, religious, and geographical places. Our core values that we nurture are diversity, equality, solidarity, and non-discrimination for every single person. In IPP4, we have a global network of over 300 MPs from around 19 countries from every place on the earth, North and South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania. What is our objective? Our objective is to engage parliamentarians in various action, advocacy efforts that support the right to freedom of religion or belief. And additionally, we provide parliamentarians with the tools they need and the resources they need to effectively advocate for this fundamental freedom. Across the globe, we are seeing more and more challenges to our right to freedom of religion or belief. People are facing discrimination, violence, situation where politics and religion are getting mixed in a harmful way. And unfortunately, we are seeing more and more of this situation across the globe, as I mentioned. And that's why we, as members of the parliament, need to have the right tools and to work together in defense of these human rights. One way that IPP4 gets parliamentarians involved in protecting and promoting freedom of religion or belief is through advocacy letters. As a network, we are committed to responding where these freedoms are being jeopardized. Up to now, we've sent 37 letters to heads of state and other political leaders to address concerns about this human right. Just last month, we, IPP4 Steering Committee, signed an advocacy letter targeting 4 countries newly elected to the United Nations Human Rights Council. We've sent letters to Cuba, Brazil, Malawi, and Ghana authorities. Our message was clear. Freedom of religion or belief is fundamental to human rights and should be a key focus in their role on the Human Rights Council. In light of everything that we heard and learned today, it is clear that the severe restriction of freedom of religion or belief in Nicaragua call for an action. Today, we as IPP4 are taking a step forward by releasing an advocacy letter that is addressed to Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua. In our letter, we point to Nicaragua government as a signatory of the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the American Convention on Human Rights of the Organization of American States. Both these provide expansive protection for the rights of individuals and communities of believers to meet freely on worship, prayer, and study. The action of the Nicaraguan government are not in line with these international standards. This advocacy letter is a call to the government of Nicaragua to respect and promote everyone's freedom of religion or belief in the country. We ask for immediate release of Bishop Rolando Alvarez and any other clergy members detained without a fair reason. Also, we want the government to allow more than 1,000 non-profit organizations which were unfairly shut down or lost funding to start operating again. This advocacy letter is ready for signatures, including everyone here today. We will ask our global network of parliamentarians to sign it too. We encourage you to also collect more signatures and discuss this letter within your networks. Our voices do make a difference, and the more of us who support this urgent call to Nicaragua to respect and promote freedom of religion or belief for all, the better. If you have any questions, IPP4 is here to respond to those questions. And if you are a parliamentarian who want to champion freedom of religion or belief, you are free to join our global network. And please make sure, of course, to sign the Nicaragua advocacy letter. It is important that we also discuss and raise awareness about the violation of fundamental human rights occurring not only in Nicaragua, but also in Cuba and other regions. Your signatures and voice can truly make a difference in these crucial matters. Fact is that we must stand for everyone's right to freedom of religion or belief as a key part of respecting human rights. Now, more than ever, this is something we can't ignore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will start with the questions. Maybe we have questions also from the streaming or from... And if not, let's open to questions right now.
And if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. But I see.
Hi, thank you for your speeches. I just wanted to ask quickly, what can we do here and now to help the situation? And how do you suggest that we share what's going on with the public who might not be aware of what is happening in Cuba and Nicaragua, especially in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned previously, we really believe that it's important to raise our voices. Whether you're a parliamentarian or civil society activist or just someone who believes in this whole idea of human rights, it's very important to speak loudly. Particularly, we as parliamentarians can use our voices and our platforms like IPP4 to make these voices being heard globally and being more visible. So one of the reasons that we are doing these advocacy letters is for that. And we are promoting the work that IPP4 is doing and the advocacy letter that we are sending. But I really think that it's crucial for each one of us to use its role in the society and to speak openly about this issue and about this concept of, promoting and respecting human rights. Thank you.
So there was another question.
Hi, my name is Ed Brown, and thank you all for your presentations. I'd like to ask the gentleman from Cuba. You mentioned that FORB violations are often hidden. They're not reported as much. Could you elaborate on what types of FORB violations are occurring? And then even further, if you could elaborate on, you mentioned that women are being targeted more than men. And we know this is the case often in other parts of the world as well, but it's good to disaggregate and find out exactly in what way so that we can better address those issues. So how are FORB violations being done, and specifically, how are they being done to women?
Bueno, lo primero es, la primera pregunta que nos hizo fue...
What was the first question? So could you explain? So the question was, could you explain more, elaborate more on what types of FORB violations are occurring, and then more specifically about how they, in what ways are they occurring against women specifically?
Gracias por repetir.
Thank you very much for repeating the question.
Las violaciones que ocurren van desde la expulsión de sus centros laborales, de sus centros de estudio, el impedimento de entrar a las universidades, la persecución policial y el encarcelamiento, la confiscación de bienes materiales. Es una amplia gama de violaciones. El gobierno cubano usa una escalera de represión que va desde intimidación verbal hasta actos judiciales propiamente dichos.
There is a wide range of violations that people can be expelled, or they can be laid off from their workplaces, they can be expelled from the universities, they can be prevented to enter universities, they can be persecuted by the police, they can be imprisoned, their assets can be confiscated. So the Cuban government uses a kind of a ladder of repressions. These repressions or persecutions can start by verbal intimidations, and they can escalate up to serious acts before court or court actions.
En el caso de las violaciones de la libertad de religión y creencia, no es específicamente mayor la cantidad de hombres o de mujeres, sino que es equitativo. Incluso dentro de las violaciones que nosotros documentamos, no están solamente las violaciones contra la libertad de religión y creencia de religiones oficiales, religiones como la católica, la Iglesia Católica, religiones como los evangélicos, sino que también las religiones afrocubanas son perseguidas y reciben todo tipo de violaciones, porque el gobierno cubano, desde el principio, desde que se manifestó, se declaró comunista, no acepta la religión, aunque quiera dar a entender lo contrario. Para el gobierno cubano, la religión es específicamente un enemigo, porque tiene poder de mover a las masas. Y el gobierno cubano le tiene miedo al poder de la religión de mover masas, porque estas masas pudieran manifestarse contra las injusticias del gobierno. Muchas veces esos miedos son infundados, porque generalmente las iglesias se concentran en la parte espiritual y no en la parte social, en la protesta por violaciones. Pero aún así, todas las iglesias en Cuba, todas las religiones en Cuba son estigmatizadas. Solamente el gobierno mantiene algunas iglesias o algunas religiones que están afiliadas al gobierno para dar la sensación a nivel internacional de que en Cuba se respeta la libertad de religión y creencia.
We cannot really say that in the cases of violations of freedom of religion, there are more men or women being the victims. I think there are the same cases or the same number of men and women who are the victims of these violations. Within all the violations that we document, the violations of the freedom of religion, the violations are not only against the official religions, such as the Catholic religion or the Evangelical Church, but also the Afro-Cuban beliefs are targeted as well, because the Cuban government, since the moment they've pronounced themselves communists, they don't accept religion, even though they try to seem as they do. They are against religion because they see religion as an enemy, because religion can move crowds. And the government is afraid of that because they are afraid that if the crowds move, they could move against all these state injustices. However, this fear is not justified, because mostly people, they practice their religion in churches in peaceful ways, and they do not try to report or fight against all those violations. So all religions are being persecuted, even though there are some religions that are adhered to the Cuban government that are allowed in some way so that the government can appear internationally as more tolerant.
La cara pública de la represión contra la religión en Cuba son las damas de blanco, porque específicamente, como le había comentado, las damas de blanco son un movimiento de la sociedad civil que pertenece a la religión, pero defiende todos los derechos humanos. Entonces ellas sí se enfrentan públicamente a la policía porque no tienen una comunidad religiosa a la que beneficiar y no entran entonces dentro de la categoría del chantaje que usa el gobierno cubano para con los pastores y los líderes de las otras comunidades. Es decir, en Cuba muchas personas, cuando el domingo en la iglesia se prepara algo de comer, muchas personas de esa iglesia van a irse con algo en el estómago a dormir con algo en el estómago porque el pastor o la iglesia como tal hicieron esa comida. Se sabe la situación económica que hay en Cuba y se sabe que muchas familias se van a la cama sin nada en el estómago. Entonces, cuando un pastor se le violan sus derechos, lo primero que hace el gobierno es decirle, si hablas, no vas a poder seguir repartiéndole alimentos a tu comunidad. Entonces, no es el caso de las damas de blanco, porque las damas de blanco no tienen como tal una comunidad que dependa de ellas. Y por eso ellas lo hacen público. Y son muy valientes y para mí siempre han sido ejemplo. Pero no podemos juzgar a los demás pastores que prefieren callar, no podemos juzgarlo como cobardía, sino que lo hacen, prefieren sacrificar su propio derecho en beneficio de su comunidad.
The ladies in white, they are very brave and they are able to show the mirror to the Cuban government and to the repressions or persecutions that they do to other believers. But they can do it because they don't belong to any religious community. They are a civil society movement. They are believers, but they also fight for human rights. And that's why they can afford themselves to go in front of the police. Because on Sundays in Cuba, there's usually food being prepared in the churches. So the people that go to the churches, that they know that they will leave having eaten something, and they will be able to go to bed that night having eaten something. The current economic situation in Cuba is such that many families go to bed every day without having eaten practically anything. So if the Cuban government want to threaten some priest, they threaten them with that they will prevent them from continuing their work, from feeding people. However, this is not the case of the ladies in white. And I think they are very courageous, protesting publicly, but that doesn't mean that we can see other priests that do not do that as cowards, because they need to choose between persecutions and between continuing the charitable work for their parishioners.
Entonces, el énfasis es, si logramos que haya un mecanismo internacional al que se le pueda presentar los casos, pero que este mecanismo internacional no haga públicos los nombres, vamos a lograr que la comunidad religiosa en Cuba denuncie los casos. Mientras eso no lo logremos, va a seguir siendo muy poco visible la forma de denunciar los casos.
So the stress we need to make is on creating an international mechanism to which we can present all these cases of religious violations, but they cannot publish the names of the victims. Because if we can manage that, if we can find such a mechanism and keeping the names of the victims secret, we can make the religious community to report all those violations. And until we manage that, all these violations will be very little visible.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this is the great time to close. We will have one more video with the closing remarks with the Commissioner, and then I will ask you to chat more informally. We have more food and coffee and tea here, so those who are not leaving for the other program happening, which I know that is, can stay here and chat with our guests here. And now I will leave the floor to Commissioner.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fred Davey, and I am Vice Chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF. Thank you so much for inviting me to offer closing remarks at today's event, and a special thanks to the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, the International Republican Institute, and People in Need for organizing this event and bringing together so many distinguished participants to highlight the alarming state of religious freedom in Nicaragua and Cuba. As many of you know, USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan U.S. federal government body that is dedicated to promoting the universal right to freedom of religion or belief around the world. USCIRF seeks to defend religious freedom internationally for people of all faiths and of none. Throughout the year, we use international standards to monitor freedom of religion or belief abroad and make policy recommendations to the United States government. Nicaragua and Cuba are two countries in particular that we monitor and report on very closely. I will offer just a few observations based on our reporting. In Nicaragua, We remain deeply concerned at President Ortega and Vice President Murillo's brutal crackdown on religious freedom, particularly against the Catholic Church. In just the past year, the Nicaraguan government has exiled clergymen for peacefully practicing their religion, arbitrarily arrested Catholic students, and sentenced Bishop Rolando Alvarez to 26 years in prison on spurious charges. The Ortega-Murillo regime also canceled the legal status and confiscated the property of Catholic educational institutions and charities, such as the Jesuit Universidad Centroamericana and the Sisters of the Poor of Jesus Christ. To stem this relentless tide of persecution, USCIRF has recommended the U.S. government impose targeted sanctions on Nicaraguan government officials responsible for religious freedom violations, and we applaud the State Department for having done that in August. In Cuba, the government continues to arbitrarily imprison religious leaders, such as Reverend Lorenzo Rosales Fajardo of the Monte de Sion Independent Church. In addition, the Office of Religious Affairs, or the ORA, enforces a variety of burdensome restrictions on religious activity. Religious organizations are required to apply to the Ministry of Justice, where ORA is housed, for registration. Registration decisions are often arbitrary and discriminatory, and unregistered religious groups are particularly vulnerable to government harassment. Membership or association with an unregistered religious group is a crime. Members of religious communities who refuse to abide by the stringent ORA regulations are targeted through detainment, interrogation, threats of prison on false charges, and confiscation of property. To bring greater international scrutiny to these religious freedom violations, we have recommended that the U.S. government secure from Cuba an invitation for USCIRF, the State Department's Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, and the United States Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief to visit the island and report on the religious freedom conditions. Before concluding, I'd like to inform you all about USCIRF's Frank R. Wolf Freedom of Religion or Belief Victims List. Congress requires USCIRF to maintain the victims list, which contains profiles of certain victims of religious persecution, including those in prison due to their faith-based activity or religious freedom advocacy. The victims list is on our website and currently has profiles for 8 imprisoned Cubans and 5 imprisoned Nicaraguans. To consult the victims list. And if you know of any individuals who have been targeted for their faith-based activity or advocacy in Cuba or Nicaragua, I invite you to log on to USCIRF's website and submit information for us to review. Thank you again for inviting me to speak to all of you. We at USCIRF are grateful for your work and for all the ways you strengthen and inform our reporting and the formulation of our policy recommendations to the U.S. government. Please continue to advocate and to raise your voices for persecuted religious communities in Nicaragua and Cuba and around the world. Thank you.